I'm in the P5 editor. I'm going to go and open up my sketch that I was working on Tuesday. This P5 variables and conditionals. And I'm going to increase my font size just to make it easier to read, but you don't need to do that. And I'm going to make a copy of this, so if you missed Tuesday, I'll post a link to this in the Discord, so you can start from where we left off on Tuesday. Let me put a little... And so you can do the same thing I'm going to do, which is make a duplicate of this, and then start a new version. So I'm going to go to File and Duplicate. And we're going to look at a couple concepts today. We're going to look at randomness, and we're going to look at adding a loop. So I'll call this Random and Loop. And I'll change the comment, the main comment, P5 random and loop. And today's date is the 12th. So let's review what we've got so far, and then we're going to make some adjustments. So right now, if I play the sketch, I can make a drawing, and I've got this goofy little brush with 3 dots on it. And if I hit the R key, I can change the color to red. If I hit the G, I can change it to green. And if I hit B, it goes back to blue. And if I hit S, I'll save the drawing as an image into my downloads folder. And if I hit C, it'll clear the canvas so I can create a new drawing. So we're slowly kind of giving the user the ability to do some different things. And so we're going to add a couple more things today to make the drawing a bit more interesting. And then we will do some documentation and publish a couple images on the OpenLab. And then for you guys, you can just add a little bit and adjust to make the drawing brush look how you like it, and then do the same thing. So we're going to make some changes, but most of the basics will stay the same. So just to cover what we did on Tuesday, we talked about variables. So I have a couple variables here. I have the fill color, which is the color blue to start. And then I have the brush size, which is the number 10. That's the width of each one of these dots. And the reason I created these variables is so that I can change the variables through user interaction. So I have my regular setup function, nothing really new happening in there. And then in my mouse dragged function, I'm going to take out a couple of these circles. We don't really need these.
You can only use one, right? One circle.
We're going to change that today.
Okay.
But you can use as many as you want.
Okay.
Yeah, you can continue adding. So what I just had there is I had 3 different circles, and the second 2 circles I just added a little bit to the mouse X and mouse Y to move them around. But we're going to do a slightly different way of doing that today. So let's take that out, and I'm going to remove some of the comments from last time since we're in a new sketch. And so my mouse dragged now is really simple. It's just fill is the fill color, and the circle is the at mouse X, mouse Y, and our brush size. And so we have this simple line again. Then in my key press function, I'm going to continue removing some of the comments from last time that we don't need anymore. So I'm going to update these a little bit. But for now, what these key presses do, so if we press a key, we use this conditional statement to check which key it is. And if it's the G, we change the color to green. If it's B, we change the color to blue. If it's R, we change the color to red. And finally, if we hit the C key, we refresh the background. And if we hit the S key, we save an image. So we're going to change a couple of these things using different types of variables. But first we're going to go over the concept of randomness. So I'm going to go back up here for a second to my mouse dragged. And then I'm going to go to the reference page for P5. And I'm going to look for random. So I'm just going to type random into the search. And I'm going to click on the basic random function here. And so you can see from these examples, what random does is it gives us a unpredictable value in a certain range. So in this example, you can see there's a lot of different lines that have different lengths and different colors. And they're all based on a random number. So if I refresh this, it's going to look a little bit different. So in this code, the first thing that's happening is this R variable is a random value between 0 and 50. And the length of the line is set by that randomness. And then the stroke is also set by that randomness. And so random is a really useful thing when you're working with computer graphics to make unpredictable or more interesting effects in your code. And a really good example of where you would use randomness if you're creating like a video game. Some older video games would just have, if you play like Mario, the Goombas are always in the same place every time you play. But more modern video games, a lot of the time, the enemies will appear in different unpredictable places. So that makes the game more challenging and gives you more experiences. So we'll start by just adding a little bit of randomness to our mouse X and mouse Y. So what I'm going to do, I don't really need to do it this way, but I think it'll make it a little bit easier to see, is I'm going to create a new variable, X, and I'm going to set that as mouse X plus, and then I'm going to add a random value. And we'll see what this does. If I say like random 10, then I'm going to replace the mouse X with X. So what I'm saying here is the current mouse X value on the page, but I'm adding a little randomness to it. So now if I draw a line down the canvas, you can see that it's not drawing in a straight line. There's a little bit of randomness that's happening horizontally. And if I increase that number by a lot, let's do random plus 100, now I have a lot of randomness. So now there's a lot of unpredictability that's happening when I draw. But notice that it's always to the right of my mouse because I'm always adding a positive number. So let's say we want to add a little randomness in the other direction. So I can change the range of my random function. So if I just have one number in random, then the range is 0 to whatever that number is. But if I add in another number, I can change the range. So if I say negative 100 as my first argument, 100 as my second argument, now my dots are going on the left and right of my mouse. And we can see I'm starting to create more of like a little like kind of spray paint thing. So let's make this more like 10 and 10 so it's not quite as wide. So now I can draw these lines that take up a little bit more space. So we can add a little bit of randomness on the Y. So I'll say variable Y, and I'll just do the same thing, mouse Y plus random negative 10 to 10. And then I'll replace the Y variable for my mouse Y. And so now I have this nice little brush. And if I want to make the brush bigger, I can widen the randomness a little bit. So I could change these all to like 20. And now I get a wider range on my brush. So let's also randomize the size a bit. So I'll make a new variable S for size, and I'll say brush size. And I don't want this to get negative, but I can go from, the brush size is 10, so I could go from like maybe -5 to let's say 10 on the other side. And oops, I forgot to add, so I have to replace my S with the brush size. Okay, so now I'm getting these different size dots. So that's a little bit more interesting. If I make this like much bigger, now my dots are much bigger on the whole. So when we're working with randomness, we're creating basically a range. So even though it's unpredictable, we can actually control what the basic outcome looks like. So let's make that smaller. Let's say like 20. So now I have kind of a little sort of spray paint thing going on. So we can also randomize the color. Let's do that next. That one is a little bit trickier. So any questions before we move on to our color on our random values so far? Okay. So for our color, previously we've just been using these CSS values like blue, green, and red. But we can't really change those values because they're just strings. They just represent one color. But we can also represent color as numbers. So for my fill color, I could, instead of having blue, I can create a color using red, green, and blue. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm just going to declare this fill color here. So one thing I can do with my variables is I can just declare them without assigning them. And this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, but the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to set the fill color in my setup and in my key pressed, and I'm also going to use it in the mouse drag. So if I want the fill color to exist in all of these different places, then I need it to be declared globally so that all the functions know about them. So these variables that I create inside mouse dragged only exist inside the mouse dragged function. Once this function is over, these variables disappear. So if I want a variable like my brush size or my fill color that I can reference both here and down here, then I need to make it a global variable. So I'm going to start by declaring the global variable here, and then to get started in setup, I'm just going to assign it a random color. So I'm going to say fill color equals color, and the color function, it takes a red, green, and blue value. So it's just kind of like our color picker in Photoshop or anything else. Like if I go to color.adobe.com, or actually we can just see this in P5 now. They have these color previews. So if I click on here, you can see the RGB. So if I, oh, it's kind of weird. Oh, because it's, oh man. I think because of the dark highlighting I have, the dark background, we can't actually see these numbers. So let's turn on the light theme for a second. Whoa, it's bright. Okay, so now we can see those RGB values. So when I move the color around, we can see that there's the hex value, which is a different representation of the same information. But then we have the RGB numbers, as well as the alpha number here. We can change that as well. So we can create a color using red, green, and blue. And let's throw alpha in there as well, just for an example. I don't know why this is here now. Let's just get rid of that. So I'm going to go back to high contrast. So when I'm creating a color that has a bunch of different values, something I will often do in JavaScript is I'll just make a new line so it's easier to read, so I don't have like a really long line. So my first value is a random color. And for my colors, the range is 0 to 255. So I'm just going to say 0 to 255, and that's going to be my red value for this color. So next I'm going to do random 0 to 255. That's my green color, or green value for the color. And then random 0 to 255 for blue. And then I can randomize the alpha as well. Although we may want to do this somewhere else, but let's see how it looks. So the last, if I add a fourth number, that's the alpha or transparency. So now we're going to get a random color, and the transparency is actually kind of nice because we see through our colors. Some of them are lighter, some of them are darker. So that looks good. So now we can recreate this when we hit, let's use our R button for random. So instead of having a bunch of different keys to change the color, we can have one key that sets a random color. So I'm going to delete these first two. And I'm going to take this one out. So now I just have my R key for random. And I'm just going to do the same thing I do in setup, just set a random color. So I'm going to copy this whole block, Command C. And inside of my if statement down here, I'm just going to paste. And the formatting is a little bit off, so let's go to Edit and Tidy Code. And so that looks better. Although it put all my keys on the next line, so that's okay. And so now I have a random color, and if I hit R, I get a different random color. And so now I can keep updating my drawing. So right now, the color can be completely random. It can be anything within our big RGB spectrum. Let's see. This one is like almost like too complicated. Let's just do a color picker on Google. Okay. So yeah, we can have any color, any hue, you know, lightness, saturation, anything like that. So if we want to give the user a specific range of colors, just like we did with the size of our brush here, we can also change the range of colors here. So for example, if I only have like 10 as the maximum for red, most of my colors are not going to have any red. So there's going to be a lot more green and blue colors than red colors. If I want a little bit of red, but not too much, I could do like maybe 50 to 100, so I could create a range. So with a range of red colors, now I'll still be more green and blue, but they'll be a little bit lighter because there'll be some red in there. We're also, sometimes the alpha is like basically invisible, so let's change our alpha. Let's say it has to be at least 100 so that we don't get anything that's just completely transparent. Okay. So then if I wanted to have mostly blue, I could reduce the amount of green. So I could say the max for the green is like 200. So now I'm going to have mostly blue colors, some greens. And so I can start to create a little drawing. And of course, this one, the way I have it set up now, let's clear the canvas. It's going to end up being a lot more abstract because I don't have as much control over where the brush is actually going. So it's kind of hard to draw actual shapes. If you want to give your user more control, then you could bring in the randomness a little bit. So I could have these go back down to 10, maybe bring the brush size down to 10. So now I can draw more easily. Okay, we're going to look at one more concept, but then we're almost done. Any questions so far? Okay, so the last thing I want to do is a bit of a more advanced concept, but it could be useful. So right now, the way this is set up, let's the way this is set up, when I click the mouse, there's just going to be, oh, I guess I have to drag the mouse, I forgot that. It's just drawing one dot at a time. And since I'm dragging, that's okay actually, because I'm creating a lot of shapes. But if I wanted to create like a lot more shapes at once in one area, what I can use, I could do more circles, right? Like what I did on Tuesday is I made another circle and I just added a little bit to it. So now you can see like it's kind of like doubled up a little bit. But we can also use a different coding structure called a loop. And a loop is a little bit more advanced, but it's really useful for creating cool effects in your sketch. So I'm just going to go over the basic type of loop. It's not really, you don't have to use it in your project, but I think it could be useful. A lot of times when you're writing code, you want to be able to repeat something. And the way that you repeat something is by using a loop. So what I'm going to do is wrap this whole section in a loop. And so that way it'll draw multiple shapes. So to do that, a loop looks a lot like an if statement, which we covered the other day. So it starts with a keyword, which is for. And then inside the parentheses, there's some conditions that decide how the loop works. And then at the end, there's a curly brackets to decide what we do inside of the loop. So I already know that I want to draw my circle inside the loop, so I'm just going to paste this in here, this whole big thing. And then we have to come up with our conditions. So the for loop means for X amount of times do this. So for however many times we want, we're going to draw a circle. So we can draw multiple circles at once. And so for our for loop, we have three conditions: where to start, how many times to loop, and what changes between each loop, or the increment, or update. Let's call it update, because you don't have to increment. So the start is usually pretty much always the same thing, variable I equals 0. And there has to be a little semicolon after the 0 here. So that's the first part of the loop. And I, in this case, stands for index. It's what we use for counting. And in programming, we start counting at 0, not 1. So 0 is always the first number. So we're going to start counting at 0. And then here's where it gets a little tricky, is we're going to use a conditional to decide when to stop. So I'm going to say I is less than 5. So as long as I is less than 5, we're going to keep going through the loop. As soon as we get to 5, this statement is going to be false, and so the loop will stop. So it's a little bit backwards, but basically what this is saying is as long as I is less than 5, we're going to keep counting. And then when we get to 5, I is not going to be less than 5 anymore, and that's when we stop our loop. So there's another semicolon here, and then our update condition, so I plus plus. That just means I plus 1, so we just count up by 1 each time. And I'm going to log I so you guys will see what this looks like. So I'm just going to say console.log I, and we'll open the console. And so now you can see in the console, it's just counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to 0. Because when we hit 5, 5 is not greater than 5, or not less than 5. So we stop counting. So it's a little bit tricky, but generally this is what it looks like. Since we start counting at 0, we actually only count up to 4, but we've counted 5 times. So you'll see that a lot in code. And then this just means add 1 to I each time. So now we get this much more filled in brush, because we're drawing 5 circles at a time instead of 1. And I can change this too. I could randomize the number of loops. So I could say variable, let's say n for loop number is random, let's say 3 to 6, and then I can just put n right here, and now it'll be a little bit randomized. So you can kind of play with a lot of these different random numbers to get different effects. And you can see now it's counting between different numbers. So since it's randomized, we can see 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3. So we can see that the number of loops is randomized. Okay. So there's a lot more stuff I could do here. I could add a bit of randomness to the color so that each dot is a different color. I could change the range of randomness in the shapes. I could make the circle a square, or I could add a square along with a circle. I could add some lines in. There's a whole lot of different things I could do to make this sketch more interesting. So it just kind of depends on what you think would look good visually. So I'm going to stop here and just do a little bit of documentation and then give you guys time to work on your project. And just for this one, it's just super simple. We're just creating these drawing apps. So all you really want to do is update these parameters, play around with the different values to create something that you think looks good as a drawing brush. So for this assignment to submit, we just want to document a couple versions. So I'll make a couple drawings. So I'll do like one that's just like MMP 100, and then I'll hit S to save, and that'll download this image of my drawing that I can post on the Open Lab if I want to rename this like MMP 100, something like that. Or you can, draw something. So I'll clear the background using C, and if I want to draw something a little bit more representational, maybe I'll draw like a little smiley face. So I'll just draw a big circle. I don't really like that color. Let's clear, choose a different color. Okay, there's a good color. And here's a little smiley face. Maybe I can add in a little bit different colors here. That looks kind of gross. I'm going to start over. So I'll draw the circle. That looks like a potato. Okay. This is going to be good enough. Draw a little smiley face. Hit S to save. So now I have two drawings. So I'll call this one smiley face. And then one more thing actually that I want to add in here is, so if I want to give this to somebody else to use, I can use the share feature and use the full screen. And so I could send this to someone. They can, draw on it. We can also, one thing that you can do is change the canvas size. There's a variable that P5 creates that's the size of the window. So we could say window width, window height to create a bigger canvas. That'll just fill the available area. So now if I go to share and go to full screen, oh, I didn't save. I have to click on here and hit Command S to save. Okay, now I have this whole big canvas. But I may want to give some instructions to the user. So there's a couple ways I could do that. I can actually add text in P5. But I'm going to set this back to 400 by 400 just for this example. So we looked at this a little bit when we first went over the P5 editor, but we haven't really used it at all, which is the HTML and CSS files that are part of this project. So if I want to add some instructions, I can go to HTML. And in here, this main section is where the canvas gets added. So I can add these instructions either above or below. So let's add it above. So I'll put a little paragraph and just say, click the canvas to draw, hit R for a random color, S to save, and C to clear the drawing. And then I'll just close that little paragraph. And so now I have some instructions here. They're kind of hard to see because I have this dark theme. So if I wanted to change that, I could also go to style.css. And let's just change the color of the text to white. Although that'll probably be hard to see. So let's actually just give the text a background. Well, actually, that's going to look weird. It's going to be hard to see if you don't have this theme on. So let's just change the color to something in the middle. Let's do purple. Okay, and I'll change the font family while I'm here. Let's do maybe monospace. Okay, that looks better. So we can change the style and HTML if we want to. It's not necessary, but it's good to have some instructions. So I'll go back to my sketch. And so now I have some instructions up here. So now I'm ready to make my OpenLab post. I have a couple images that I drew with my drawing program. And so I'll go over to the OpenLab. Where's my MMP 100? And I need to log in, so I'll log in. And just create a new post. I don't see the options, so I'm going to click on the gear here and choose a category. Oh, it looks like I didn't create a category for this, so let's create a category for programming. And that category is chosen now. And so I'll say my drawing program. And then I'm just going to add in a couple images. So I'll go to image, upload, go to my downloads. Here's my MMP 100. And let's add another one. And then there's a template here, as usual, for our project. So I'll just paste this in here. And so the title is just drawing program. Semester year is spring 2022. And coding programming languages P5/JavaScript. And then just a little description. So you could talk about what colors you wanted to work with, or shapes, or whatever. So I'll just say I created a spray paint style brush using random colors and positions with a circle shape. And so something like that, pretty simple. And let's take a look at that. And then let's add a link to the code as well. So I'll say, here's my code. And then you can select that text and click on the link and just grab, you can just click the link here, but you can also go to share and copy the edit section and paste that in there. And let's open in a new tab. And I think that's ready to go. And so now we've published. Let's go view the post. So there it is. Here's the code. And that's basically it. So it should be pretty straightforward. You guys should be able to finish this in class today. You don't have to do too much with it. Just add some variety to what you think looks good for the drawing program. You know, as I mentioned, you can vary the colors, vary the shapes, vary the size, like whatever you think will look good. And then just make a couple of drawings as examples and post them on here. And you don't have to use all of the different function, like all the different code that we kind of demoed, but whatever you think will look good. So I'll put a copy of this new link into the Discord, and I'll upload this video in a bit as usual.